Hello, everybody, and welcome to the IFTA Screen Discussion Series, putting focus on each of the feature films submitted for this year's IFTA Awards. Every week, we are putting spotlight on a variety of diverse feature projects representing the best of Irish filmmaking. And today, I'm delighted to be joined by the filmmakers behind Ballywalter. So joining me today on this discussion are director Prasanna Puwanarajah, actors Patrick Kielty and Shauna Kerslake, writer Stacey Gregg, and composer Niall Lawlor. So thank you all for joining me. And I'll go first to, I suppose, Prasanna and Patrick. For both of you, this is a kind of a big jump into the world of feature films as respectively director and lead actor. And I'll come to you first, Prasanna. Did you find something to connect with in this story in terms of how it's a story of two people who find a new challenge that brings something new to their lives? Did this sort of have any parallels to you approaching directing a feature for the first time?
Yeah, it really did, actually. When we were lucky enough to have a few weeks of rehearsal before we shot in December and January 2020 and 21, so right in the kind of middle of the pandemic, really, the lockdowns. A period of time together in London before we linked up with Shauna in Belfast in prep. And when we first met up in Belfast to start a kind of period of rehearsing together, we just sort of ended up in a conversation quite early on of talking about the things that were kind of scaring us, you know. And Shauna obviously comes from Dublin and was working in a very specific, distinct accent from the north. Patrick had never worked as a screen actor before, and I'd never directed a feature film. So we just kind of laid it out on the table straight away that these were the kind of scare spaces, and that the scare spaces were absolutely at the center of what we were doing. They weren't really like peripheral concerns, things that we could sort of be kind of a little bit afraid of, but you know. So yeah, I mean, absolutely, it wasn't, and it was new beginnings all the way. And you know, Stacey, one of the things that I did have in this was my working relationship with Stacey, which is now, I think, in its 11th year. So that was a sort of really wonderful touchstone, and the project started 6 or 7 years ago with us kind of having conversations around characters and themes and scales, I think, of story and human journeying and connection, and tones as well, tones of storytelling. And then Stacey went away and wrote this script. And so, as well as it being kind of something that germinated, I think, together, it was very, very distinctly hers. And I have always responded to Stacey's work. So I think it's as much, yeah, I mean, in other words, it got scarier and scarier the closer we got. And then there was the point in prep where we were just kind of like, oh yes, none of us have done this before. And there's going to be 150 people watching us work out whether we can.
And for you, Patrick, did you think this particular film and the themes of it were appropriate for such a jumping off point for you?
It was interesting, you know, the relief of actually now hearing the blind fear that everybody else had, because I just assumed that I was the only one. And that first day when we got around the table and we started to read it, and Stacey was in the corner, and you know, Shauna was coming to this with so much good work. So I felt that I just needed to say, look, guys, I haven't screen acted before. I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm terrified. And what was lovely then for me was that everybody else sort of had another fear that they were bringing to it. I think the guys saw something in maybe where I was in my life, you know, whenever they sort of kindly offered this my way. I think the idea of kind of exploring a bit of pain and loneliness and all of these things that everybody tends to go through, was it felt like at the right intersection, really, to sort of try to scrape a wee bit of that away. You know, when you're a stand-up and you have that notion of walking out, and the thing that terrifies most people about being a stand-up is walking out in front of a load of other people. But that's the thing that comforts stand-ups, because they're in control. The idea of walking out in front of a set where, as Prasanna says, 150 people who do know what they're doing, and you don't. It was an easy leap to make into the character, really, in terms of, I think this film is about, it's about the very fine line between things going right and things going wrong in people's lives. And sometimes you can be hiding, but you can be hiding just in plain sight. And it just takes the right person to see that and help you through it. And I think that's why Stacey's writing in this is so beautiful, that idea of just two people who are kind of hiding in plain sight and end up helping each other.
For you, Stacey, when you were working on the script, were Patrick and Shauna people you had in mind, or were they cast sort of later on when the film was being developed? And were they as close as you were hoping to the characters you had on the page?
Yeah, I mean, it's without a doubt, the answer is yes. When you're writing, of course, you have to keep an open mind, because you don't know what's down the line, and there are conversations to be had and all sorts of things. But I would say that the part of the process where we'd sort of bounced a few drafts back and forth, and we were starting to really think about production and really think about casting, both Shauna and Patrick were names that came up very early on in the process. And that's really exciting. And you never want to sort of fall in love too much too quickly, because, as I say, it's all part of the process. But we feel obviously incredibly lucky then to have got the team that we did. And yeah, of course, the delivery of those characters is, nothing short of beautiful, because suddenly they become, endowed with all of this insight and all these little corners that just make what you've, committed to the page real people. And so, yeah, that's a gift.
Another question for you is, I think the film is really unique in how diplomatically it kind of splits the narrative between these two protagonists. Like, I think we get to know both of these characters equally well as the film goes on. So was it important to you to sort of tell this man and this woman's story sort of simultaneously, and not have sort of one be a supporting character to the other?
I think there's something interesting about certain elements of development, and there are times in my journey where I've almost felt alienated from the process of writing, because there are certain rules that we are confronted with quite often, and there's a good reason that those tools and those rules exist. But that, essentially the way I look at it now is that those things are a toolbox, with which to tinker and, interrogate the thing that you're making. But one of those rules that you often get is like, it's only one person's story, to the extent that sometimes everything else gets stripped back. And I think that if you have an interest in more global cinema or even European cinema, I think that it's like quite a sort of US, UK idea that it has to be a single protagonist and we have to be with them at all times. And that creates a certain kind of film that's brilliant, but it's certainly not the only way of telling a story. So when it came to this one, yes, that balance between the two of them was there from the start. And finding that balance was a constant process that continued in the shoot, that continued very much in the edit. There's a lot of calibration to get that right. Having said that, I do think that it's Eileen's film, but that there's a sort of yin and yang thing going on. There's a beautiful reflection and a balance. And, the point is that they, in many ways, save each other at slightly different points on a journey. So my feeling is that we're with Eileen. She's the kind of heartbeat of the film, but we can't be there without Shane. And he arrived, it's interesting, this project more than other projects arrived very fully formed. So I immediately knew who Shane was. I immediately knew who Eileen was. So it kind of wrote itself that way.
Right. I'd love to bring you in, Shauna. Now, you at this stage, you've played so many of these really engaging, complicated female characters across film and TV. So what were the main elements of Eileen that sort of drew you to want to be in this film?
Well, I was a big fan of Stacey's writing, like from the offset. And then when I met James and Prasanna in London, it was that thing that Stacey was talking about, like you can't fall in love with it straight away in case they're like, oh yeah, lovely, but we don't want you type of thing. So which can happen very often in an actor's life. So, but I know there was some parallels to this character, to a character I played before, like, you know, in A Day for Mad Mary. So it's definitely something that I wanted to revisit and try do differently or look at differently, you know, but there are aspects that are, you know, similar. It's a woman trying to find her way, you know. But the team around it was a huge part of why I want to be a part of it. Like I wasn't there for the Dublin premiere or the Belfast premiere, so I didn't get to sing these guys' praises. So yeah, it was just like an amazing team to work on, and one of my favorite film sets to ever be on. We just had the crack. It was brilliant. I loved it. So it was a mixture of everything, like, you know, who gets to shoot a film during lockdown, you know, it was beautifully written. I had, like, you know, to be directed by Prasanna. I've said this before, that like obviously we didn't know this from the offset, but the way he would give you, I think he worked with me and Paddy very differently. What I would need might not be what Paddy needed, and then giving you a nugget of something, and then you're like, yeah, okay, let's go again. Like it was very exciting, and I think because he's an actor's head in him, he was able to like tap into what we needed really quickly. And yeah, working with Paddy was the crack and a pleasure, you know. So I was like, yes, sign me up. I was just afraid they were going to say, no, we don't want you, you know.
And what was your approach to the accent you're doing in the film? Because to me, at least, it was extremely convincing.
Well, it was, Prasanna said this to me, and I was like, ugh. He said very early on when we were rehearsing, I think you should stay in the accent the whole time. And I was like, I think to be given permission to do that, because a lot of the time you could go onto a set and do that, and, you know, people might go, oh, she's notions, she's trying to, like, you know, be method or whatever. But it was really helpful. And from the offset, you know, initially I was like, oh, this is awful, this is terrible, and I'm so embarrassed, which I said to Paddy and Prasanna. I was like, oh, I'm going to butcher this until I don't butcher it anymore. But it really, really helped to kind of stay in it, and yeah, you'd hear your slip ups and all that. So it was just do it until it sounds better. Now I did have an accent coach as well that was helping me along with scenes before we shot, and yeah, it was just to stay in the accent and to listen to as many people as possible. But it was amazing. I'm surrounded by a crew from, you know, Northern Ireland, so trying to convince them that I was from there as well.
And they were completely convinced. Brian Faulkner, one of our co-producers, he met Shauna, and Shauna left the room, and then Brian was kind of like, have we booked the wrong person? I thought Shauna was coming up from Dublin. And we were like, well, I think the work is sort of completely sort of and the crew, a lot of the crew just sort of had no idea. And actually the thing that Shauna was saying there about there being kind of like weird things around staying in an accent or staying in character, and these sorts of things are they're quite easy to lampoon, and they're quite easy to sort of, I guess, belittle. But I guess like a sense of immersion in an accent is quite a kind of sort of spiritual thing, and it's about how thoughts are formed and how like an energy exists in a person, and it just felt like a valuable thing would be to not be consistently switching between those modes of existence, and that it was just kind of straightforward to find it and sort of stay in there. And Stacey did a huge amount of work with Shauna as well. I mean, it was just sort of, it's kind of flying hours, it's mileage, isn't it? And you know, just sort of getting used to it. But then, like I was saying earlier on with Paddy and the various things that we were all kind of finding challenging, there is a point we've just got to step off and do it and see what happens. And I think the crew really sort of held us all in our separate ways. And yeah, people were none the wiser in terms of Shauna.
I think Prasanna said it the best there. You should have diverted that question to him, because that is it. It's getting the thought forms and the rhythms and that kind of thing for sure. And yeah, Stacey helped with remember that Levi Jean piece that I kept having to piece to record, and then I'd have to keep recording the same piece to try to get better at it. Now I butchered it every single time. Like I'd say, Stacey was like, "Oh, why did we pick this girl?" Because it was bad. It was bad. Yeah.
For you, Niall, your score is one of the most striking things about the film, I think. And the film is obviously balancing this careful comedy drama balance tonally throughout. So what sort of notes were you given for your composition in terms of making sure that atmosphere was maintained in the music?
I just want to, I might run out of battery because I didn't expect the meeting, but yeah, just to briefly answer it. So I think I said at the last Q&A that, for me, essentially everything was in the writing. So I received the script, and so all of the landscape and the portraiture and the nuance and, everything was contained within the subtleties of Stacey's writing for me, straight off. And I'm glad that, as a musician, it came from a literary source rather than a visual source. Because I think if I would have seen any of the movie, I would have been very distracted with perhaps kind of grandiose ideas of soundtrack. So it was really Stacey's writing and Prasanna's interpretation, and I have to say, his musical direction with me is very careful musical direction. So he kind of directed me and the music like he would direct an actor. That's the way we worked. So that just kind of opened so many doors all at once of my perception musically. And that's how we did it. And that's how we had so much fun doing it. And there's the battery. Take care, guys.
All right. Thank you, Niall.
Just to sort of pick up from, I hope, where Niall was going. Niall was a musician I first heard playing on Grafton Street in Dublin when I was there to watch Stacey perform in a play. It's sort of like amazing sort of roots that kind of grow into themselves. But and so I checked him out on YouTube. I just Googled Grafton Street busker guitarist, and there he was. And he had this sort of very rich and delicate, so a sort of scale, I guess, but a smallness to things, a detail. And we started writing, we started working together, and Niall started playing music for the film about a year before we shot anything. And we were just exploring themes around the images that we were taking on the Ards Peninsula, and old pictures of Ballywalter around, the turn of the last century that we found and things. We talked about a couple of musical references, but really it was about finding its own kind of thing of these two people in this landscape. And Niall would record these improvisations into his WhatsApp, and we would discuss them and talk about them. And we just sort of arrived at a place before we shot. And so when it came to post-production, there was this kind of amazing compendium of sketches and things. And about half of the music in the film comes from that sketchbook, essentially. And we had to sort of EQ and scrub some of the tracks. Niall had recorded them in this incredible, beautiful raw format, literally using the video function on his WhatsApp, in a room in the house that he was living in at the time that had very dirty electricity. So sonically, it was very kind of crushed and sort of distorted. So there was some work to do on it, but there was also something beautiful and very analog and natural, in the sort of most honest sense of that word, unforced about it. And then there was a short period of recording some fresh music and fresh tracks and things in Dunleary in post-production, which we did in a little studio belonging to a lovely guy called Hugh Drum, which sits between a mattress shop and a car garage. So you sort of have to point the microphone towards the mattress shop side to kind of, not hear kind of carburettors all day. So that was the process, and it's beautiful. The whole score is played, I think, on 3 guitars in total, and a Rickenbacker lap steel from 1935, I think, or something like that. So it's and a harmonica.
Go back to Patrick. There's obviously sort of something of an irony in having you play this newcomer to the world of comedy when you have been so experienced in the zone. So I'm interested in how your own experiences kind of played into how this character is approaching performing comedy for the first time in the film.
I mean, it wasn't much of a stretch to sort of get up there and not be funny. That was the idea. I think one of the brilliant things about Stacey's writing is what you expect to see or what you expect to hear. Stacey's very good at actually going, no, you think it's this, but it's not. So the idea of Eileen is the comedic genius in this film. She's the one who's got the wizard. She's the one who has got that wit. Whenever I was approached for this, I actually thought that because there was some type of comedy course involved, that the guys wanted to talk to me and some type of advice about how that works, or maybe was I the guy taking the comedy course. I think it's very, very smart to use that comedy course as a backdrop to Eileen and Shane's journeys. I think that comedy in everyday life in Belfast is very much used as a front, as a protection, as a shield. If you look at the characters on the course, if you look at the way that Eileen and Shane react with each other, the first thing is, I'm going to try to be funny, which is essentially a way of telling you to fuck off and leave me alone. And so once that gets peeled away, I think then the vulnerability at the heart of it is is where it's at. I think one of the things is that audiences come and they expect to see a certain type of film, and they walk out with a completely different experience, which is really lovely. I think one of the things that we found is we're screening this post-pandemic. We shot a movie. We were lucky to shoot it, during lockdown, and a lot of young people have come to see the screening. The IFTA screening we had in Dublin was, packed with a lot of young people in Belfast and Cork as well. And the idea of, I think Prasanna has made something sort of very pertinent to now. I think there's a lot of people that are just a bit lost, and their lives, aren't completely on the skids, but they're just trying to work out where their lives are and that fine line between things being okay and things not being. And so Eileen's story is, whenever my grown-up nieces, went to see the film, they came out of it and they were like, wow, and there's just little bits, that idea when Eileen's just sitting there and everyone's having their dinner and she's out with those girls and that plate's empty. There's just little things in there which sort of the comedy is the mask in the film, while Stacey and Prasanna are slowly breaking your heart.
Did you and Shauna sort of trade any secrets in terms of her experience with film work and your experience with comedy? Did you sort of bounce off each other in that regard?
Well, look, she had nothing to learn from me about being funny. I had everything to learn about by being an actor. So it was I think every day, because we shot it in lockdown and you're coming up the road from Dublin and you're locked away. You don't go back to the crew. You don't go back to your family. Shauna was up there, in Belfast for 2 months on her own, and I was going back, to my place on my own. And so every day we came together, there was no pollution to our experience. It was weirdly like the car journeys. It was, Shane is out there on his own. If you look at Eileen's life, she's back on her mum's couch, but she's on her own. And so the stuff that we never really talk much about how to do it. But I think the fact that we were just together there and feeling our way, Shauna, you're sitting beside Shauna, you're getting a masterclass how to do it. And the fact that you're in there, you hope that just some of that energy, you know, of being in that tight space together helps to create something, you know, lovely, which the experience was, you know.
You have any thoughts, Shauna, on that experience of shooting the film during lockdown and how it fed into the story of the film?
Yeah, like I just want to start, like Paddy is super modest. It's ridiculous because and I've said this before as well, getting to work opposite Paddy because he hadn't officially acted in a film before, like even though obviously he's a performer, it was lovely because he didn't have any of the habits that actors can have. He like, you're sitting in a scene with him and he's listening, so it's like, oh my god, this is lovely to play, you know. So there never really felt like a bum note or a bum, like, you know, kind of like, oh, that didn't work for either of us. Well, for him, I mean, because he was being honest all the time, like, and you know, when in his performance, so there was never like oh, that felt hammy or that didn't work. It's like, oh, so it felt very effortless, and we were just kind of, you'd forget, you'd be in the car and nobody could come in to our space because of COVID. So we, like, it was a little bubble, and every now and again you'd go, oh yeah, they can hear our whole conversation. We better be careful, you know. It's called, like, whatever we're talking about, we have to get out of the car and someone's like, oh, I knew that, and you're like, how did you, oh yeah, you're mic'd up, so you're like, yeah. But yeah, that is true, that what Paddy said about going back to your hotel room, like, and that's exactly it. We were living it. It was like going home and then coming back in. So we didn't talk about it, but we lived it. Like, I'd just be in my hotel room with my little grilling green beans, like. That's not a lie, like. So sad. And it's like my little hotel room smells like green beans now, but gotta get your vegetables in.
Amen.
Yeah.
From your perspective, Stacey, did the sort of claustrophobia of how these two characters are living at the start of the film, was that enhanced at all? Do you think by how the film was shot, would it have been different if it had been filmed pre-COVID or now?
Yeah, I mean, I think just simply as the guys have laid out, I wasn't allowed on the shoot because of COVID. So I just sent crying emojis.
Is that the reason? Is that the reason he gave you, Stacey?
Exactly. I was there, man. I was there.
We actually set up the whole shoot to happen in the pandemic, just to sort of
keep her away.
We had the option of shooting before,
Yeah,
but we were like, let's just stick around.
Yeah, these first-time directors will do anything to have total control, Stacey.
So we'll get to the bottom of that after this Zoom. But yeah. I wasn't actually on set very much. I was on briefly. So it was quite a mystery how things were unraveling, or not unraveling, nothing unfolding.
Yeah.
So yeah, like I love listening to these guys talking about the experience of it, actually, because, you know, you always hope that people have a positive and nourishing experience, you know, in the midst of something that you're creating. And at that point, obviously, I was very much outside of it. But yeah, clearly that experience meant that there was a sort of a focus and a sort of shared experience that was happening that feels like it really contributed to those performances. And I think that's something that audiences feel like they've responded to, is what feels like the authenticity of those, especially those car conversations.
There was another thing as well, which was just sort of about the spatial result of the pandemic. You know, I like there was the roads were just emptier, you know, and so there was a kind of strangeness to everything, I think. And you know, that road that hugs the lock is actually usually pretty busy with freight vehicles, and we managed to find it in relatively quiet rhythms. We also were able to get into locations that we just wouldn't have been able to get into, like the Empire Comedy Club at the end. Just would have been a real challenge to have for 3 days, but the place was boarded up, so they were like, yeah, come on in, and they were sort of really into it. So so there was that side of it as well. But there was something about, I think there was a tension, I think, carried on set, which was just really practically to do with being 48 hours away from the loss of employment of up to 5 weeks. And so every day when those COVID test results came through, James Bierman, Ollie, producer, Brian Faulkner, who was running the COVID protocols on set, and I would just sort of exhale for a day, you know, and be like, great, we'll get to the next day. We had one positive test out of about 650 PCRs in the throes of the pandemic, which is an extraordinary show of commitment from the crew to get the film to the finish line. And I think we had to meet that level of commitment with our respect for what they were sacrificing, which was really not spending time with their families over the Christmas little hiatus. And it was, you know, and I really did see it as, you know, together we were collectively protecting this number of good jobs in a pandemic. So that tension, I think, was live somehow in, you can sort of breathe it in the film. I think you can feel the preciousness of every shot that we got, or I can sort of decode it somewhere in there, you know. And I can remember, like, in the last week, we got to the Wednesday of the last week. I remember the moment where I thought, I think we're there. I think we've got enough now to, you know, even if we kind of went down as a shoot now, we would get there, which is a kind of really, it's a really intense and quite extreme, actually, ticking clock, kind of swinging knife hanging over a production, you know. We heard about a production that went just before us that closed down at the end of its first week because of a slew of what turned out to be false positive tests. So it was really, really nerve-wracking. So I think as well as the kind of the sort of joys of it, you know, all of those tensions were things that Patrick and Shauna and the whole of the rest of the cast and the crew were sort of navigating, you know. Are we going to get sick on set because we're in a Toyota Corolla with like 3 guys in the back? Who knew, you know? Anyway, that was cheerful, wasn't it?
Well, I was about to just add to that, and it's just kind of a reiteration of where we started, but I do think that those sort of like central themes of loneliness and human kindness and the smallness, you know, alongside how epic those things actually are in people's lives, all of that was obviously compounded by the experience of the pandemic, you know. So it felt like a very interesting and quite special thing to be, you know, working with at the time that you know, that the film was shot and subsequently.
Yeah, I think that's really important, you know, that whole idea of, you know, whenever everyone was locked down, the stuff that we were missing were those really small things and the most important things in life, which are just those connections. So to actually try to shoot a film about human connection during that time, it did ramp it up a wee bit, Shauna, didn't it, in terms of, you know, the stuff that you had taken for granted maybe previously you weren't, and all of that stuff's at the heart of the film.
Great. I think that's a great note to wrap up on. Thank you all so much. And it's been wonderful to hear about the making of this film, which is in consideration at the 2023 IFTA Awards. And I hope anyone who hasn't got a chance to watch it yet will do so immediately after hearing you all discuss the process behind making it. And congratulations to all of you on the film. And thank you so much for chatting to me about it today. It's been lovely speaking to you all.
Thanks, Lucien. Thanks, Emil.
Thank
Cheers.
you. See you
Thanks so
soon.
much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Thank
See
you.
you guys.